So how do I reconnect with an avoidant ex without getting hurt again or stepping on their defenses? Okay. So this question came from a member of our online community, and there's a little bit more detail I want to provide. I recently reconnected with an ex that I have loved for years. He's shown more consistent communication than ever, but I know he has an avoidant attachment style and a fear of commitment. How can I approach the topic of dating again without triggering his defenses? And how can I tell if he genuinely cares or is just keeping me around? Okay. So let me know in the comments or in the chat, how many people have ever struggled with that? An ex wants to come back and you're trying to kind of navigate that situation with a little bit of tenderness and maybe a little bit of apprehension. Let me know. So when you've held a torch for someone and they come back, and I think this is probably particularly true if it's been after years of what ifs or maybes or reconciliations and then breaking up again, it can stir up a lot of emotions. Things like hope, nostalgia, longing. I like to call that attachment hunger. And when that person starts showing more effort than they did the first time around, it's natural for us to start wondering, wow, maybe finally this is really our time. But it can get a little bit tricky, especially if historically this partner had an avoidant attachment style, because now you're not just navigating your own emotions, but you're likely to be trying to navigate their fear of intimacy as well. So there are really 4 important points that I want to explore in this segment. And the first is what consistent communication does and does not mean with an avoidant ex. How to approach the conversation about dating again using soft strategies in communication. How to tell the difference between real emotional investment and breadcrumbing behavior. And then how to stop tiptoeing around triggers and get comfortable with uncomfortable feelings. Okay. So if you have ever felt torn between excitement and caution after an ex reappears, especially one that you feel like you never quite got over, the goal of this segment is to give you the insight that you need to stay grounded, to be able to read the signals with greater clarity, and to stop tiptoeing around them. Okay. So let's dive into this. So the first point I want to make, looking at what is avoidant communication and what does it mean and what does it not mean? What consistent communication does and does not mean with an avoidant ex. So avoidantly attached individuals, they tend to fear emotional closeness, and it's not because they don't care, okay? But it's because closeness historically typically meant pressure, some kind of loss of self or autonomy, maybe failed expectations, and some kind of rejection or negative consequence. So when we have a partner that is avoidant showing up again more consistently, that is not nothing. That's not nothing. And it could be their way of signaling interest in the only way that they know how, sort of incrementally, slowly, and from a distance. Kind of test the waters. But consistency isn't always the same thing as emotional availability. So maybe the consistency has gone up, but the emotional availability is still hanging out down here. So you want to ask yourself, is the communication consistent and meaningful and intimate? Am I learning more about this person? Are we sharing more together? Are they inviting me into their spaces? Are they asking to be invited into my spaces? Do they include you in their life and their decision making? Are they making space for connection on a deeper level? Or is it just that they're dropping casual text messages in order to keep that door open? So, those distinctions matter, because if you are holding on to a hope of reconnection, it really has to rest on more than just showing up more often. You want it to rest on mutual emotional growth and a capacity to show up in increasingly meaningful ways. Okay. Otherwise, you're going to wind up back at the same place you were the first time. Now, the second point, how do we bring up the idea of dating again without triggering his defenses or scaring him off? Okay. So when someone is avoidant, it's true, direct emotional conversations can sometimes feel threatening. They're very sensitive to emotional content and material. But that doesn't mean that you can't talk to them about what you want or what you're feeling. It just means that you have to be tactful. So when you approach a conversation about dating again, I recommend using what's called a soft strategy in communication. And you're just more likely to get a substantial response, and it's just more likely to land better. So, soft strategies are communication strategies that focus on expressing appreciation, respect for your partner's autonomy, and offering choices. So, for example, instead of saying something like, okay, what's the deal? Are we dating or what? You might say something like, I've really enjoyed reconnecting and I appreciate how you have shown up more consistently in our communication. That's really important to me. And I was wondering, maybe this could evolve into something deeper. How would that land with you? So it's not a foregone conclusion. It's an observation, it's appreciation, it's expressing curiosity and inviting them to be part of that evolving discussion. Okay. It's an invitation. And we're respecting your feelings while leaving them enough space to respond honestly and move towards you. Now, if a question like that sends them running for the hills or results in a vague reply, that's telling you something too, because no response is a response. An indecision is a decision, and you cannot tiptoe around this person's triggers. If this person gets skittish, that means that his fears are outweighing his feelings, and you don't want to strategize your way out of facing the truth of that situation. So, for those of you that are unfamiliar, if you want to learn more about soft strategies, I recommend checking out my course, The Courageous Communicator, where we delve a lot more deeply into the topic of attachment informed communication. And we also talk about safe strategies, which are for our anxious and disorganized or fearful avoidant partners. And for those of you that are already in the course, we talk a lot more about this in lessons 4 and 5. So make sure you log into your dashboard. Okay. So our third point, how to know if he genuinely cares or is just breadcrumbing. So how to know if he's really emotionally invested or keeping you in his orbit? Well, genuine care is going to look like following through in action on what he says he'll do, expressing curiosity about your life and your well-being, making the time and space for connective and interactive activities that build intimacy, and demonstrating small acts of thoughtfulness and consideration that show that he's paying attention. Now, compare that to breadcrumbing behavior, on the other hand, which looks like inconsistent effort, maybe flirty or nostalgic messages without any real solid plans to move forward. It could be inviting you to do things with them, but then showing no real interest in your life and your activities. The conversations could remain on a surface level or disappearing whenever you ask a question that might be a little deeper or more intimate. So if it feels like the progression is going in a loop, then you want to pay attention to that. And you want to check in with, well, how is my growth going? And not just theirs. Because a person can circle back into your life because you feel safe and familiar. Maybe they even feel like they have unfinished business with you, but that doesn't mean that they are actually ready to meet you on the same level. Okay, so the last point I want to make here, how to stop tiptoeing around their triggers, which means getting comfortable with uncomfortable feelings. So let's talk about how we can stop tiptoeing around people's triggers, because even in the most secure relationships, we're going to have uncomfortable feelings come up. No conflict doesn't necessarily mean that the relationship is healthy. We are human beings. We have a lot of similarities, but we also have a lot of differences, and conflict allows us to know and get to know each other better. So the goal isn't to avoid them, it's to build a capacity to be with them, to be with our needs, to be with our triggers, to be with uncomfortable feelings without necessarily having to abandon ourselves. So if you're always monitoring his triggers, The problem is you risk betraying your own needs just to maintain some kind of peace or equilibrium. So instead, I'd recommend asking yourself, can I tolerate the discomfort of not knowing without abandoning myself? Can I sit with the possibility of loss if I express what it is that I want without twisting myself into somebody that I'm not? So just even posing the questions is doing the work of evolving our emotional maturity, because it's not about protecting ourselves from disappointment or conflict all the time. It's about stepping into relationships where we don't feel like we have to audition for love, where instead our authenticity is that gateway to intimacy. And all you can really do is show up with your good intentions, communicate your interest as honestly, as genuinely, and as tactfully as you can, but you cannot control his feelings or how he will respond. You can knock on the door, but he has to be the one that is willing to open it. And you also don't want to get into a relationship where you feel like you're walking on eggshells all the time just to satisfy attachment anxiety, because it's not just about working hard to make things easier for him. It's also about pursuing the type of relationship and partner that becomes a refuge from having to work that hard. That was my biggest lesson for sure. And you know what? Give me a comment in the chat there if this sounds good to you. What if relationships didn't have to be so much work? What if instead they were a refuge from work? Just give me a yes or a thumbs up in the chat. Wouldn't that be nice? And what would that look like and feel like? What would that even look like and feel like? I'd love to know what you think. So to kind of wrap up this segment, we cannot force someone to meet us where they haven't yet arrived. But you can meet yourself right where you are, and you can do it with clarity, with self-trust, and a deep respect for your needs. And so if this second chance is meant to be, it will grow in mutual honesty and care, not in some fantasy or fearful tiptoeing. So I would recommend don't suppress or smother your truth just to keep them around. Make sure that you speak it, invite them in, and be willing to set a boundary if they're not ready, because it sounds like you are. And claiming that readiness for yourself, that is where your power lies. Once you claim it, now it has to show up in your life with this person or somebody else. So I hope that's helpful.
Also, remember to subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. I put out videos once a week and I wouldn't want you to miss out.